Lately, it seems that all the news we hear about butterflies, and particularly monarch butterflies, nature's most beautiful insect, all the news seems to be bad. And I have here an article that I read recently which says monarch populations are at their lowest level since records began in 1993. I would like to know why. Many other people would like to know why, and we'd like to know what can be done about it. This is Peter Laufer.
Thank you, Moses. It's great to be here in Toronto well, it's always great to be in Toronto. I love coming to Toronto, but particularly because my dangerous world of butterflies began here in Toronto. I came to Toronto to research a book about American soldiers who came back from the war in Iraq opposed to the war, or who refused to deploy to the war, and who were coming up to Canada in an attempt to replicate what you undoubtedly all know occurred during the Vietnam War, when some 50,000 American servicemen, and they were all men in those days, came to Canada, many of them becoming Canadians because of the incredible welcome that so many of you provided for them, which I think needs a serious round of applause. Thank you and appreciation from those of us in the United States who opposed that deplorable war. And I came up to talk with these Americans who were here in Canada, some of them attempting to become Canadians, and wrote the book about what they were doing, why they were opposed to the war. As you can imagine, particularly talking to the veterans who came back from the war, this was sobering to research. And when the book came out, I went on the book tour, and out on the West Coast, just south of Vancouver, I made a stop in a bookstore in Bellingham, Washington. And at that bookstore, C-SPAN, the American network, was there. It was a hot summer day. The hall was as packed as this one is now, and because of the television lights, it was very hot. And I talked for about an hour about this extraordinarily serious subject. And the men, then they were all men also, with whom I spoke, who were opposed to the war. I'm just thinking now, there were a couple of women then. It really has changed over this generation. And as the talk came to an end, as often happens in these cases of book reading, somebody in the audience raised their hand during the question period and said, "What is your next book going to be about?" And because it was such a heavy moment, a heavy hour, I don't know where it came from. I said, my next book is going to be about butterflies and flowers. And there was in the crowd, just like there was now, just this titter, and I quickly took advantage of it to say thank you very much and went off stage left. Now, C-SPAN broadcast that over and over again on their book TV show, and in the lower third on the television was my name and my email address. And so over the summer, I was on the receiving end of a barrage of email messages, and about half of them thanked me and complimented me for giving voice to these soldiers, and about the other half said, "You are a traitor, why don't you go to Canada?" And in the middle of all of this, there was one note that came from a woman and identified herself as an expat American living with her husband in Nicaragua. And she said, "You made a joke, or what you tried to make as a joke, about writing a book about butterflies. We have a butterfly preserve here in Nicaragua, and we invite you to come down to our preserve and see that, in fact, there is a book to be written here about butterflies. There are a lot of stories." And I thought, that's interesting. I get a lot of different emails. I put that aside, and a few days later, she wrote to me again and said, "I'm serious. There are stories here. There are stories about smuggling. There are stories about endangered, threatened species. And come on down, take a look." So my wife, Sheila, who's out here somewhere in the audience, hi there, and she shoved me on an airplane to Managua. I went up to Granada. Outside of Granada, out on a dirt road, I encountered this butterfly reserve, and the two of them were a font of information. And at that point, I began learning about things that never occurred to me, that there's a trade in bred butterflies for the purposes of butterfly releases that are becoming more and more common at events like weddings and funerals because of the magic of the butterfly and the butterflies, when it works, being released and flying up. And then controversies about that. Is it appropriate to commercialize this natural phenomenon? And is it okay to have a butterfly that's bred in Florida, released in Toronto? Is that going to create some kind of crossbreeding that is going to be problematic for the species? I learned about the smuggling of butterflies and the parallels that exist with the drug trade and the gun trade, because those same routes can be used by the butterfly smugglers just as they are used by other smugglers of endangered species and threatened species all over the world. That for whatever reason, there are people who are obsessed, who are consumed with the idea of having something that can be dangerous, is illegal, otherwise gives them some sense of power. It's often associated with the drug lords, with political types who tend toward the authoritarian. So I found myself moving from the butterflies into this world of long snakes and big cats and great apes, and perhaps you've heard of the pythons that now are filling the Everglades, the Burmese pythons that are bought initially by these types. I don't really know how to characterize them except to describe them. Maybe if you imagine South Beach and a guy with his shirt open to here and several gold chains and a python around his neck, thinking that this is going to be a magnet for a girlfriend, and not realizing that this python that he initially buys that can hang over his neck starts to eat the mice he gives them, and then is moving on to the rabbits he gives him, and then it becomes 24 feet long and 200 pounds, and he can't afford or doesn't want to eat it or clean up, as we heard from the penguins, the poop. And so he puts it in the back of his pickup truck, and he takes it out to the Everglades and dumps it there. And now it's a problem, a magnificent problem, where it is an apex predator rivaled only by the alligators that are down there, and causing devastation to the Everglades. I learned about the big cats. The census isn't clear, but cats that are bred in captivity in Texas, the number of cats there, cats along the lines of tigers, those kinds of cats, big cats, rival in number now the tigers that are in the wild, and it is completely legal. You can move to Texas now and buy yourself a tiger and park it behind your trailer if you wish. So that led me to Missouri. There are several states in the U.S. where it's virtually lawless. And how many of you remember the ghastly story from a few years ago where the chimpanzee named Travis, who was living in Connecticut and ripped the face off the woman who was trying to corral him? Do you remember that story? Travis was drinking wine out of stemmed glasses, and his drawings were put up on the refrigerator, and the owner, so-called owner, should we be owning these? Is that the right terminology? The owner of Travis, who's no longer alive, said that she considered him her son. Well, Travis was bred in Missouri, just south of St. Louis, by a woman, Connie Casey, and her husband, and that's the business they're in, to breed and keep chimpanzees They would take them out to parties, rent them out for various affairs, breed them, and then sell them. You could, I'm not sure she's still in business with all the attention and following what happened with Travis, but you could buy a chimpanzee. What do you think that would cost, to buy a baby chimpanzee that you could raise to paint pictures to put on your refrigerator? What kind of number sounds right? 5,000. Do I hear more than 5,000? 10,000. 10,000 in the back row. How much for a baby chimpanzee? 10,001. Yeah, more than that. How much? $50,000 US to buy a chimpanzee. It's incredible to think what type of person is doing that, and that within certain boundaries and under certain circumstances, it's legal. It's legal in Missouri. Whether you can cross state lines depends on a patchwork of laws, and of course, it's very easy for these laws to be violated. We don't have passport control between the states, and even getting them up here to Canada or down to Mexico, of course, would not be particularly difficult. So that brings us back, or brings me back, to thinking about the monarchs, especially since I'm here. And the monarch, this incredible animal that is facing different types of problems that are part of this overall attack on the animals that we share the planet with. So the monarch, as you may know, migrates with a magic that still has not been figured out. And it comes up here. You probably all have seen them. This is the northernmost part of the monarch migration. The monarchs that get up here to Ontario then fly back to their overwintering grounds in Michoacan State in Mexico, just up on the mountain from Morelia. And those monarchs then make their way back here with a multi-generational migration. They first come up to Texas and Louisiana, then around in Missouri somewhere where Connie Casey is breeding her chimpanzees, and then into the Great Lakes area, and then back up here into the northeast of the United States and into this neighborhood in Canada. Over generations, how do they get back here? Why do they know to get back here? And once they're here, how do they know how to get back down there? And back down there in the mountains in Michoacan, and here we have a couple of ideas. Back there in Michoacan, there's a national park because the monarch is of such value intrinsically and also as a resource because of the magnificent amount of tourism that it attracts. And so there's a national park to protect the forests where the monarchs overwinter. Nonetheless, in this same kind of cabal of criminality, there is illegal logging that goes on and is devastating the forests where the monarchs overwinter. And the police can't control this. The police, unfortunately, in Mexico are often corrupted, and they can't control it anyway because of the vast area involved. And so when I went down there, I encountered a couple of guys with an amazing idea and a real David and Goliath kind of an approach to it. And what they're doing is reforesting the area below the national park in hopes that they can plant it with fast enough growing trees that will be valuable enough and easier to access and be legal, and consequently put some slowdown at least on the devastation of the habitat at the top of the mountain. And then what about the whole migration? The milkweed is the other half of the monarch magic. And the milkweed is where the monarchs lay their eggs. And it's where the larvae mature, eating the milkweed as they then turn into the butterfly. And it is the milkweed that creates the poison in the butterfly itself that prevents predators from eating the monarch. The milkweed is being devastated from here down to Texas. It's being devastated because of factory agriculture that's going fence line to fence line, and it's being devastated because of the Roundup, to use the Monsanto trademarked word, that's being spread to kill weeds, including milkweed, and spread largely on crops that are known as Roundup Ready, the Roundup Ready corn and the Roundup Ready soybeans that can be sprayed with the overspray that is designed for the weeds, and it continues to thrive because the herbicide does not bother it since it's Roundup Ready. So how about this? Now, this seems in a way counterintuitive, I would imagine, especially to a crowd like this. What's the right thing to do to stop this factory farming and to get rid of the fence line to fence line farming? What's the right thing to do to stop with this Monsanto Roundup Ready soybean and corn? Perhaps you don't want to eat the GMOs because you think they may be bad for you. So these would be natural solutions, except at this point, can that kind of change occur? And is there time for the monarch? So what if we could come up with Roundup Ready milkweed? Exactly. Roundup Ready milkweed, and we send Johnny Appleseeds across Canada and the U.S. from here down to Texas and Louisiana, however it's done, to try to propagate Roundup Ready milkweed alongside the Roundup Ready soybean and corn and provide for the monarchs. I don't know the science of it. I'm a journalist and a journalism professor, but in terms of ideas, maybe something worth considering, maybe something that could put a halt to what Moses said, this devastated population now of the magic of the monarch, the most incredible butterfly most of us see or at least embrace as this treasured symbol, an emblem of exactly that magic that makes people want to use it at funerals and weddings to celebrate rebirth. Something to consider from my dangerous world of butterflies. Thank you very much. There you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
What do you think? Any chance?
Very well done. What?
Any chance that would work?
Yeah, yeah. It seems, well, it's kind of like the rhino, right? You put the poison in it.
It's a variation on that. How can we take the problem and turn it around?
Exactly. Well,
okay.
Have you got somebody actually on it?
I'm just considering it now.
All right. Good. Well, maybe some of the speakers who were here,
perhaps.
Maybe we can do something.
Bring
3D print milkwood.
It isn't that far-fetched necessarily,
Not at all.
right?
Yeah.
If it's working for the corn and it's working for the soybean, one would think it would work for the milkweed.
You know, Peter Diamandis and some of the people who will be speaking this afternoon, they have this idea, if you want to get great creative effort on a particular problem, you create a prize. And
Should we do that, Moses, together? Should we come up with the
prize.
Roundup Ready Milkweed prize? What do you think? Let's do that.
And it doesn't take that much money to motivate people to put a lot of effort, so that instead of engaging one team in some way that you might finance yourself, you get dozens of teams around the world working on it, and eventually somebody will come up with a solution.
Let's talk about this.
Let's do that. All right.
Thank you, Moses.